Which herb have you found useful for a condition that is different from what we commonly understand and accept as its healing property? And how do you use it? I can answer this question in a couple of ways. First off, we have herbs where one part of the plant is well known. Let's say nettle leaf. And nettle leaf, of course, is a remarkable um, herb. It has aquaretic effects. That means a non-irritating potassium-sparing diuretic. It is rich in minerals, so it builds bone, it builds blood, as in Chinese medicine. It's a shui tonic. It also helps to stop minor capillary bleeding. To quote my dear friend David Hoffman, he says, when in doubt, use nettles. I can't do it with his accent, but he's absolutely right. So nettle leaf is an amazing herb. Now, some people know that nettle root can also be used, and the nettle root is primarily used for treating benign prostatic hyperplasia, BPH, in older men. But I would also say there's at least some preliminary evidence suggesting it may also slow the progression, possibly, or even possibly inhibit the development of prostatic cancer. But one of my favorite parts of nettle is nettle seed. And nettle seed came to me probably 35 years ago. I was out by my old barn at my farm, and it was a typically late New Jersey summer day, and it was hot, it was humid, it was probably 92 degrees, about 122% humidity, or at least it felt like 122% humidity. And I'm in the shade, sitting in the barn, by the barn, and I'm thinking about a patient of mine who had glomerular nephritis, and I had put her on the Romania 6 formula, and that will help plateau people with degenerative kidney disease. And it will work for a year and a half, maybe 2 years if you're really lucky. And she had been on it for about a year and 3 or 4 months, and her EGFR, her estimated glomerular filtration rate, started to drop after being stable for about a year and 3 months. And I knew it wasn't going to be working anymore. And I felt really bad because, she had been to every place and every place. And the problem is, for a lot of the people who come to see us, we're not their first choice. Now, these days, sometimes we are, but back then, this would have been in the early 80s, I think, or maybe mid 80s. Back then, often herbalists were the last choice, meaning they had tried everything else, and out of desperation, they wound up coming to find you. And so I'm sitting there and I'm thinking, I have nothing left to offer. And, if I felt like I had somebody I could refer her to that might have some options for her, that would have been fine. But I didn't. I just couldn't think of anybody who had anything more than I had to offer that she hadn't tried already. And all of a sudden, in the background, I had this big nettles patch, and the nettle plant starts waving. And I look around, and it is still. There is not a breeze to be had. And I'm thinking, oh, is there a bird in there, a squirrel, or chipmunk, or whatever? And so I stand up and walk over, expecting something to fly away or run away. And instead, in my head, I hear, I can help her. So I'm taken aback a bit. And then I stop and I look at the plants. And, nettles, late August, the leaves are all bug eaten and they don't look healthy. And I'm thinking to myself, well, nettle leaf, first off, it's the wrong time of year to gather nettle leaf. And secondly, nettle leaf is an amazing herb, and it definitely helps with hematuria. So, bleeding from the kidney or the bladder, but it's not gonna, I don't think it's gonna be strong enough or effective enough to treat something like glomerular nephritis, which is an autoimmune disease of the kidney. And then I hear, not my leaves, my seeds, and they kind of rustle. So as soon as I could pick my jaw off the ground and put it back into place, I thought about it for a second. I said, like, what did I have to lose? So I went back to the house. I got a jar. I got, gloves and everything. And I picked a whole bunch of nettle seed. And I made a tincture out of it. And I let it, tincture, took a couple weeks. And, the only thing I knew about nettle seed at this point, and this is why I felt some certain level of comfort, I'd never heard of it being used for medicine. Although later I went and found out that Maud Greaves, Modern Herbal, she does mention some uses for it, but not a lot. But I had read that it was used in Europe as an emergency food when people were starving. They'd grind it up and make sort of a flour or a gruel out of it and eat it. So I knew it wasn't toxic. So I called up my patient and I told her about this, and I told her that it was highly experimental, but if she wanted to try it, I was pretty, confident that there would be no negative effects. And she said, look, you've helped me as much as anybody else has been able to help me. I trust you. I'll try it. So she tries it. And within 3 months, her EGFR is back to 18. In 6 months, her EGFR is at 20. At like 9 months, her EGFR is at 23 or 24. Her nephrologist says to her, what are you doing? And she says, oh, yeah, I'm going to see this herbalist. I'm taking this herb. And he's like, no, 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 I don't want to even hear this. Just keep doing what you're doing, which to me is a very bizarre response, but nevertheless. At a year, she's at 28. Her EGFR is at 28, and the nettle seed kept her EGFR at between 26 and 28 for 12 years. And she died 12 years later of something totally unrelated to the kidneys. And, if her progression of her kidney disease had gone on the way it normally would have, within a year of when she started the nettle seed, if that hadn't occurred, she would have been on dialysis, and the average life expectancy with dialysis is about 5 years. And that was the first time. And so like nettle seed to me is just this remarkable kidney trophorestorative. A trophorestorative, think of it as food for a tissue or an organ. Remarkable. That's one example. I'll just give you a few other quick ones. Another one where there's a part of a plant that's not commonly used is mullen. And everybody knows mullen leaf. A lot of people use mullen flower, but what about mullen root? You gather the root in the autumn of the first year because it's a biennial. And mullen root is wonderful for facial nerve pain. And it also has benefit for things like benign prostatic hyperplasia, urinary frequency, urinary leakage, things like that as well, for whatever gender. Then I'll just mention things like saw palmetto. And everybody thinks, oh, saw palmetto is the prostate herb. We were just talking about prostate problems. And I will agree that saw palmetto has some benefit for benign prostatic hyperplasia. But the reality is, and this is funny because we were just talking about nettle root, the combination of saw palmetto and nettle root together, by the way, are more effective than either one by themselves. But saw palmetto as a single remedy is kind of disappointing. I mean, yeah, it helps a little bit, but most people who are taking it, they'll go like, yeah, it helped a little bit, but it's not that impressive. And if you want something impressive, you combine it with other herbs like the nettle root and white sage, maybe some collinsonia, some Biden's leaf. But when saw palmetto was introduced into Western medical practice in 1877 by Dr. Reed from Savannah, Georgia, it wasn't introduced as a remedy for benign prostatic hyperplasia. It was introduced as a remedy for people who had cachexia, for people who were undernourished, underfed, people who, when they got pneumonia, especially elderly people, got pneumonia and they lost a lot of weight and they couldn't gain their weight back. That was what saw palmetto was originally introduced for. And in fact, I wrote a book, I think it came out, in the 90s. It was called Saw Palmetto for Men and Women. And the whole point of the book was saw palmetto has been sort of pigeonholed into this, it's the prostate herb. It's not. It's a herb that has benefits for many things, including the prostate. It can also be used for women. It can be used for things like deep cystic acne. It can be used for PCOS, polycystic ovarian syndrome. Works very nicely along, again, with other herbs. And so it is really an herb that has many benefits. It's also been shown to enhance immune function. So it is also a lung chi tonic for people who have dry, irritated, weak lungs. And so again, a marvelous herb. And so be careful about allowing herbs to become pigeonholed into a little sound bite of information like black cohosh is the menopause herb. Again, most women who take black cohosh for menopausal symptomology are going to be underwhelmed because it's not that great by itself. Combine it with some Vitex, chase tree, and some motherwort, a little licorice, a little sage. Now you got something serious. So it really helps reduce symptoms. But, when we look at black cohosh, one of the things the eclectics talked about it being used for was for what they call muscular arthralgia. Today we call it fibromyalgia. And so, along with herbs like ashwagandha and white peony, it can be really useful for helping to relieve things like fibromyalgia pain. And so, again, most herbs that people are comfortable with and familiar with, we often know a little piece of what they do. And I doubt there are very many herbs out there that don't have many more uses than are commonly known and many more uses that anyone knows. And so for me, it's always, what do you know about an herb? Hopefully is going to be different 5 years from now than what you know now. All right. So long answer to a short question.